is that the MacBook Air M1?
Yeah, it's pretty cool, right? It's got 16 gigs of RAM, a terabyte of storage.
Hey everyone, check out this broke boy with an M1. What a dumb loser.
Imagine having M1 when M2 is
I
out.
heard they dug one of those up in
Ooh,
Alberta. Are we making fun of
recently.
someone's computer? I want to join in.
If someone has slightly older hardware, bully them for it low.
Apple recently unveiled their M2 MacBook Air, and it's pretty awesome. It's got a better scored-off design, a better webcam, a new 4-speaker arrangement, 4 new colors with color-matched MagSafe cables, and the new M2 chip. However, they've kept the old MacBook Air with the M1 chip, and for the same original $999 USD price as well, making choosing a MacBook Air in 2022 much harder. So, which MacBook Air should you buy? And why did I personally choose the M1 MacBook Air after seeing the M2? So first off, the new design. The M2 MacBook Air kills off the tapered edge design for Apple's new flat design language, and the device is thinner overall. Compared to the M1 MacBook Air, the difference is quite noticeable. The M1 MacBook Air does feel thinner because of its tapered design though, and in my experience, the tapered design is more comfortable to type on. The M2 MacBook Air felt a lot more sturdy when I got to use it in person at my local Best Buy though, but it didn't really feel like a MacBook Air. MacBook Airs have always had the tapered edge design, and it's kind of sad to see this iconic design go, although the new design does seem to be a worthy successor. The M2 introduces 4 new colors with color-matched MagSafe cables. Yes, with this new MacBook Air, MagSafe makes a return. It's actually saved one of my peers' laptops. I tripped over the cable, and their MacBook was hanging half off the edge. If that was a non-MagSafe cable, that laptop would have been gone. Now, the M1 MacBook Air doesn't have that extra MagSafe port. It only has 2 USB-C ports and a headphone jack. USB-C is nice, but I'll have to give points to the M2 MacBook Air because MagSafe is just plain awesome. So, if you have to have MagSafe, then the M2 MacBook Air is the cheapest new MacBook with it. Other than the colors and chassis shape, the biggest difference between the two laptops visually is probably the screen. The M1 MacBook Air uses a design that dates back to 2018, when Apple was finally upgrading the 2017 MacBook Air that had bezels bigger than your mom. Now, this MacBook Air design is getting a little dated. The M2 MacBook Air pushes the bezels even further to the edge. Not quite as far as the 2021 MacBook Pros, but they're getting there. This means that the M2 MacBook Air has a nearly full screen experience, save the notch. So, if you want the latest and greatest looking display, and you don't mind the notch, the M2 is for you. If you can't stand the notch, it looks like the M2 is off the table. Now, the notch is what holds the M2's new 1080p webcam. It's apparently higher quality, but when I was using the devices in person at the store side by side, I honestly couldn't tell the difference. Okay, yeah, that's cool. Hello, it is editor me right now. Hi, it is 2 in the morning, and I am sleep deprived, but I am not sleepy at all. I am editing the video, and I am doing very well. But actually, I did tell a difference. The colors on the M2 were like less washed out than the M1. So like the colors on this looked a lot nicer. Jesus Christ, why am I so ugly? Okay, then the so the colors on the M1, this is the M1, it's got more washed out colors. Well, this guy has got like more realistic colors. But other than that, I couldn't really tell a huge difference, so it's a minor upgrade, but it makes the differences where, like, I don't know, the differences are where they count, okay? I can't do this. Also, keep in mind that Apple introduced a new feature called Continuity Cam with their new macOS Ventura coming soon that allows you to use the much better camera on your iPhone as a webcam for your Mac. If you really want a slightly higher quality webcam though, the M2 Air does have one. Generally though, it seems like a pretty minor upgrade. And here is the M1 MacBook Air's webcam, so it does look pretty okay. And the microphones actually are really good on this computer. The webcam is passable. The new MacBook Air M2 has a 4-speaker setup with spatial audio compared to the 2 small ones in the M1 MacBook Air. The M1 MacBook Air actually has pretty solid speakers, and the laptops didn't sound any different when I played Billie Jean on either of them. However, that's not a definitive test, and there's no doubt going to be differences here and there, so if you want better speakers, the M2 is for you. For the average person, the difference shouldn't be noticeable, and the speakers are just fine on the M1. So one of the big selling features of the M2 MacBook Air is, well, the M2 chip. And yes, it is pretty fast. Unfortunately, in some cases, the M2 MacBook Air can actually be significantly slower than the M1 though, but we'll get to that really soon. The M2 MacBook Air has more CPU cores, more GPU cores, and more RAM, up to 24 gigs. However, once you spec it out that much, you're entering MacBook Pro territory, and you should really just get a MacBook Pro at that point. The M2 MacBook Air also has a media engine, which is a higher bandwidth media encoder for faster video editing, but let's be honest, the average MacBook Air user doesn't give two f***s about that. What most YouTubers seem to forget is that video editing is in fact a very niche audience. The vast majority of MacBook Air users are never going to use this thing to edit videos because they're not video editors. They're mostly people like students, people who travel a lot when working, your parents' parents, average users with average tasks like web browsing, note-taking, emailing, video chatting, file management, and word processing. And let me just tell you right now, both the M1 and the M2 smash these tasks like nothing while sipping battery life. So honestly, the performance shouldn't make a big difference in everyday life, and the M1 is still very solid for completing these tasks. Now it's time to address the elephant in the room. The M2 MacBooks have boiled up a lot of drama lately because the base models have slower SSDs than even the M1 MacBooks because they only use one NAND chip. Considering the fact that the base model is one of two standard configurations, they're going to be one of the two options that the average consumer gets to choose from when they walk into a store. Any other configurations have to be custom ordered directly from Apple's website and then shipped. Now again, this only affects the base model, and the SSD speed issues shouldn't be a huge concern to the average MacBook Air user even if they do get the base model, but who knows how this will impact performance in the long run. So if you're thinking of buying a base model M2 MacBook Air, don't buy it if SSD speeds are a concern. Shell out a little extra for at least 512 gigs of storage, or save some money and go for the M1 MacBook Air. So, why did I choose the M1 MacBook Air? Well, I just can't seem to justify the upgrades that you get for $200. They simply don't provide a lot of value for me. The MacBook Air M2 upgrades the design, the chip, display, and the webcam mostly. However, none of these upgrades really matter to me all that much. For the webcam, I rarely ever use the webcam on my MacBook, with COVID seeming to come to a close, and Apple's continuity cam makes it so that we probably won't even get webcams on Macs sooner or later. As for the display, I have basically no complaints about the M1 Air display, and it does what I need it to do. I also just don't like the notch. It looks utterly ridiculous in my opinion, and also I use a lot of menu bar apps, and as you can see here, if I had a notch, they would be covered. And in terms of performance, I was coming from a 2015 MacBook Pro with a dual-core Intel processor, so the M1 was a huge performance jump. The only thing that would visibly make a difference in everyday use for me would be the new design, and also MagSafe. However, I was hoping for more ports on the M2 Air, and honestly, the new design just wasn't worth the extra $200 I would have to shell out. Overall, the M1 was enough of an upgrade over my existing computer that I couldn't justify spending more on the M2 for upgrades that I didn't need. So, if I could reduce all of the knowledge in this video to one sentence, it would be this. Most people should get the M1 MacBook Air, especially if you want the best bang for your buck. And you should only get the M2 Air if you value MagSafe, a better webcam, and a new design, and if you're willing to shell out an extra $200 for these upgrades. The thing is, when a new product drops and everyone jumps on the hype train, it's hard to resist the magical new colors and flashy marketing, and we tend to forget that the previous generation isn't getting any worse, and it's still as good as it used to be. If I'm recommending a laptop, I'm going to be recommending the M1 MacBook Air simply because it fulfills the vast majority of people's use cases, and for most people, the extra $200 you spend on the M2 just isn't worth it. I like to think of the M1 MacBook Air as a base model Honda Civic. It'll do just fine for the average user, and it'll still be reliable for years to come. The M1 MacBook Air is like a higher spec Civic. It's the upgraded, fancy version of everything you love about the basic Honda Civic, and it's certainly nice and luxurious, but in the end, it's still a Civic, and can't compare to luxury cars like the MacBook Pro. No, not this one. The other one. Yeah, that one. If Apple priced this at $200 cheaper, it would be a no-brainer, but it's pretty hard to recommend when the base model should be avoided due to the SSD performance issues, and purchasing a higher spec version of the device, which most people will do once they hear about the news to the SSD issues, brings it close to MacBook Pro pricing, which has a much better display, an active cooling system, ports, and the much more powerful M1 Pro chip. All in all, I think I'm going to stick with my older but still reliable Honda Civic. I'm going to be using it for the remainder of my high school career, and it will also be my faithful companion in my university journey. It will also be the device that I use to edit future videos on this channel for a really long time, so if you want to see some of those videos, then be sure to subscribe. Also be doing an in-depth M1 MacBook Air review soon, so if you're thinking about getting the M1 Air but you're still unsure, be sure to get subscribed for that, and it just might help you make a decision. In fact, that review will be edited on this MacBook. This video that you're watching right now will be edited on the M1 MacBook Air. Anyway, thank you very much for watching until the very end, and that's it for this video. See ya. Why are you still here? At least it's not Intel. Yeah, that's fair. And I also got the box with the remains of a computer I destroyed in one of the, one of the very first videos on this channel, actually. Don't watch it. But yeah, I'm gonna be using this. Oh boy, it's gonna be a pain in the ass to clean up. And we got the cable is taped to this bottom plate, which has all the rest of the trash on it. Oh shit, hat. All in all, I think I'm gonna stick with my older but still reliable Honda Civic. Just kidding. I don't have a car. I'm broke. Anyway, let's step it down.